Edgar, come out and play. No, wait, no, I don't want that actually today. Sorry, no Edgar today. By the way, you know what? I got it playing on my laptop here. So hang on a sec. I got to go turn that off. But Cheshire, can you introduce us real quick? Because I got to play it on my laptop there because I've got to turn off the monitor because I'm an idiot. I'll be right back.
Oh, Cheshire, your volume's not on. Can you hear me?
Today we have Atheism versus Logic with us here with us today, which I'm super excited for. I'm really glad you were able to make it. I'm so glad you watched our jokes, and I hope you had a good time and we didn't offend you too badly. But just the fact that you were able to reach out and come by, awesome. That's fantastic. And then we have below me here is Emerson. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Emerson Green, and I'm the host of Counter Apologetics, which is a podcast. And it's intended to be like a resource for atheists. It's just sort of shorter episodes about, the fine-tuning argument or Pascal's wager or, just anything that you'll come across when you're talking to your crazy aunt at Thanksgiving or anything like that. Like, do Western values owe their existence to Judeo-Christian values? Why is God hidden? What is Jordan Peterson talking about when he's talking about God and that sort of thing? So, kind of short episodes.
I need to figure out.
But yeah, it's available.
I am back.
It's on.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm sorry.
It's on, wherever you get podcasts.
Just interrupt on your own channel, Steve.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My head. I usually have my laptop on, and I monitor the chat sometimes with that, and I had left it on, and so you could actually hear it playing through that. So my apologies on that. This is. By the way, if you guys may not know this, but we actually have high production value today because we actually have God producing for us today. Oh, he does exist.
Praise be.
Oh.
I knew my
you guys can figure out who's. Yeah. So anyways, you guys want to know what kind of doing today, and so do I guess. The other day, Cheshire and I did a video review of Atheism versus Logic's video, I guess, how to convert an atheist. No offense, we found out it didn't work too well, but hey, we tried, right? It was a theory to practice. We used to call that something where we say we have a theory, we're going to put it into practice. Didn't work. As far as I know, Red's still, is an atheist, but hey, you know what? Right now, Red's rhetoric.
Better than that. Red doesn't use labels.
He doesn't use labels. This is true. He doesn't like labels, but he doesn't believe in God. He believes, it's all bullshit for the most part.
The video actually did work on me. I believe in Cthulhu now. I worship him daily. So
well, actually, I think it'd be.
You believe in what?
In the Cthulhu, in the mythos of the Lovecraft, it would have been was it Naratoop or who's the Outer Lords? Nyarlathotep. Yeah, I can never.
Yeah.
I mean, I can go really obscure and say Negake Boros, but I don't know you guys. You guys know who that is?
Is that another D&D thing?
No, it's not.
I just remember.
Not this time.
What was that? What was the reference to?
Negake Boros? Negake Boros is the underwater sea tentacle god from. It's basically that kind of version of Cthulhu, but it's from League of Legends.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I got you. Okay, I'll stick with advanced D&D, and basic D&D, Asmodeus and Beelzebub.
Tarask. If you want to go D&D,
but anyways,
Tarask.
Atheism and Logic has been kind enough to come on and talk about a little bit about his video and talk about some of the intelligent design arguments he wants to kind of discuss. And we have Counter Apologetics back with us, by the way. He hasn't been with us before, but I was introduced to him the other day, and I really liked some of the stuff he was writing and talking about. And I was like, okay, he's the guy. He's the go-to guy about ID. So hopefully he'll never meet Mr. ID at Intelligent Design because you'll lose your mind. But so we'll start this out first. You watched our review of your video. Do you want any commentary on that? Anything you want to say, positive, negative? Feel free, by the way. And by the way, we're very thick-skinned, so if you hated it, we're going to be okay with that.
Hurt my feelings, please.
Well,
yeah, I have no
feelings
to hurt, so it really doesn't matter.
Let me apologize for my setup here. I had everything, lights, a tripod set up in a room in my house, and then my Wi-Fi didn't work. So letting the audience know I had to come out here to a parking lot, which is where I am right now, sweating like crazy. So sorry about that. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay.
That's good, actually. Yes. Much better than it was.
Yep.
Okay.
Your video's working now,
yeah,
too.
So No, I think those videos are so funny. You know, Godless Engineer was the first one to do a review of me, and then Deconverted Man, and now you guys. And
shout
I got
out to
Thick Skin
Deconverted Man.
too.
Deconverted
Yeah,
Man's the one who got us to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it actually helped because, it helped because I see that I need to say functional information. DNA is functional information, not just information. So it's very helpful. I appreciate any criticism. It helps me in the future better communicate.
That's a fantastic
for younger creationists. That's good.
Yeah, we're gonna get along great if that holds.
Right. That's what I look.
May science win. So I'm all about science. May science win. You know, if science,
great.
You know, decide. You know, if it's scientific, I'll change my mind. You know, observational science, not theoretical science.
You can't really disentangle.
We can get into that a little bit.
All right.
Yeah, Emerson, there's stuff to work with here. We you know what? You might have to come back every so often. This is going to be a lot of stuff we can get into. But we appreciate your feedback on that. We had fun doing it. It was a little light spirited. We weren't trying to attack you. But you're my favorite kind of person to come on because I've dealt with young creationists for years. That's how I started off. And the best ones are the ones like you that, you know, they do say they like science and stuff like that, and they're willing to have conversations. I'm not going after people because they have the certain belief, right? I don't go after them personally. I want people to have discussions, and maybe they might come around and say, hey, you know what? Maybe I was wrong. Or I might say, hey, you know what? You convinced me. I am now a younger creationist. Don't hold your breath. But, you know, it's a valiant effort, right? But,
side note, chat. But yes, that was observational science. So take a shot if you're drinking.
Oh, are we doing younger creationist bingo?
Oh, the chat probably is. I'd be surprised if they weren't.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. It's par for the course. So, what do you want to go with this atheism versus logic? Because again, we found out your method. By the way, I have to ask you one question before we get into the intelligent design things. Have you ever converted an atheist using your method?
Not
because I was really curious about that. I asked that. And I okay, all right, but you think it works? But you haven't.
It's sowing seeds. I'm asking people to be skeptical and rational about abiogenesis. It's that simple. I think abiogenesis is very irrational and unscientific, and so I'm just asking them to be skeptical about it.
You got your chest excited.
So happy! I'm so happy you actually used abiogenesis because so often that just gets swept under the rug with and it's just never addressed as it should be. So, thank you.
I actually,
and that's really only
here.
The only. Sorry, there's a truck going by. That's the only thing I attack. Really, is abiogenesis. That's my focus. I'm not attacking natural selection and evolution after life arose. I'm attacking non-life to life without a creator.
All right. So let me jump on that real quick. Then I'm going to turn this over to Emerson here. One, I actually have a logical proof abiogenesis did happen. And it's a very simple kind of proof, but it basically goes along the lines that there's a minor issue with this. So,
Steve,
we lost Steve.
We lost you.
Thank God. Moving on, Emerson, please.
Wait, hang on,
okay,
back.
Steve?
Okay, so
I think you just had a stroke. Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm freezing here.
You actually have to.
I'm issue. It out, man. My connection's free.
Like you have to.
I find a parking lot. It can't be on my end.
Find a parking lot. Just stop me.
God, stop me! No. Here's look at abiogenesis. At one period of time, there was, and by again, this is not a formal proof because there was an issue with it. I'm aware of, but at one point in time, there was no life. There's life now. So at some point in time, life came from non-life. Okay, whether that was because of natural means or that was because of God, it's still abiogenesis. God creating life is still a form of abiogenesis.
I agree. That's why I say abiogenesis without a creator. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you mean specifically by abiogenesis?
I'm sorry.
You asking me?
What do you mean just what's your definition of abiogenesis, just so we're on the same page?
The process of non-life becoming life. And it's generally thought of as by natural unguided processes, not by a creator.
Right, but I was confused because in your atheism versus ribosomes video, you were definitely talking about you weren't talking about abiogenesis. you were talking about like irreducible complexity and how something like a ribosome could arise by natural processes, but it wasn't just strictly because you said, oh, I don't challenge natural selection or evolution or anything like that. But at least that's not what I saw in Atheism versus Ribosomes.
I noticed that as well. By the way, but you're an creationist.
It might be what you're addressing here.
Real quick, how do you accept evolution then?
All right, I am a young Earth creationist. Emerson, I'm so glad you're here. I'll listen to some of your podcasts. And well, I'm just glad to be somewhere where you guys love science. You guys seem educated and you seem like you've got a heart of teachers. Yeah. You know, it's frustrating when you've got to talk to somebody and they don't even know what DNA is. So thank you guys. Yeah, to answer your question, and I might be wrong here and you can correct me. I thought that life had to contain a ribosome. So to me, a ribosome existing is part of abiogenesis. And correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, you're wrong about that.
Yeah, you're wrong. That's kind of a weird phrasing.
Because there is the protocell theory. You know, there's a protocell before a living cell, but a protocell is not life, is what my research kept leading me to believe. That's what everyone was saying, is that a protocell is not life, it's a precursor to life. Do you agree with that?
Well, some people think ribosomes came out of like the RNA world. So if you would consider RNA life, which I think most people would consider ribonucleic acid to be getting closer.
Yeah, getting closer, but I'm talking about actual life. I believe actual life would require a ribosome for it to. We had to get to that stage for it to be considered life.
So. I'm a little bit
confused.
What is actual life?
So
I have a question that might actually clarify. Yeah, I might be able to clarify this a little bit and help you out here.
Okay.
So you're talking about non-life to life. Well, currently we have cells in our body. Do they count as being the same alive as I am, or not?
I mean, I'd consider them alive. It's different because they're part of a complex organism. But yeah, I'd consider. But I'm really talking more about the original, the common ancestor, the original cell that was alive, that is the common ancestor to all life on Earth, is what I'm talking about.
Look at the population.
Well,
that would be more
I'm concerned that you're...
Go ahead, Josh. We got a little bit of delay. We're using vMix again.
I'm concerned that you're... Yeah. I'm concerned that you're breaking this down to a singular when it's not really how that works. Those sorts of things happen with more than one at a time. You can't break it down to one singular because one singular doesn't function properly.
Well, let's break it down a little bit basics. Okay, first of all, Luca is a population, not a single organism. But there's the ribosomes, there's prokaryotic ribosomes, and there's eukaryotic ribosomes. And if you look at the large and small subunits, they're different. I believe it's, again, I'm going back here. I haven't looked at this stuff for a while, but I remember I believe it's for eukaryotes is an 80S, which subunits of 60S and 40S, and then prokaryotes something else, which I don't bother prokaryotes. But the original cells didn't have protein synthesis based upon ribosomes. We have that now in modern synthesis. But as Emerson was pointing out, there was this bacteria that's predicated on RNA, coming from RNA, RNA world hypothesis. And correct me if I'm wrong, Emerson, but we catalytic actions, because normally a protein will act as an enzyme that actually has a catalytic function. And we know now that that's not necessarily the only way we can have enzymatic functions. We can have it through RNA. So this chicken and egg problem that I think that you promote in your video isn't a problem, because we can show that there are of some kind without having a ribosome having small peptides, because of polypeptide, right? Now, again, I got a biochemist in the live chat right now, a PhD in the live chat. Hopefully he's like not losing his mind after what I just said, and he'll tell me if it's true or not. Emerson knows this stuff too, but that's how I understand it. So I haven't looked at biology in a while. This was going back a few years when I was just talking about biology in this channel. But Emerson, does that sound about right?
I mean, I'm not as far as I know, ribosomes are fairly complex structures, made of dozens and dozens of proteins. I think that the reason Jeremy's coming at it differently is because I'm assuming Jeremy believes in, not just going from non-life to life, which life is surprising. It's surprisingly hard to come up with a conceptual definition of life that encompasses everything that we would consider living. But
Right.
I think that what he's imagining is, a full cell like coming into existence sort of spontaneously, which is not really the naturalistic picture. So I think there's a bit of a disconnect in communication there.
No, I understand spontaneous generation has been debunked. And please believe me, anytime I say something can't happen, I'm saying you can have billions of years. So no, I'm talking about a slow process to a living cell. And when I think of a living cell, I think of something very similar to a prokaryotic cell, which is more simple than a eukaryotic cell. And I'm sorry, correct me if I'm wrong in thinking that the first cells, so I won't be singular in cell, but the first cells that developed, I thought they would have ribosomes because that's such an important part, taking the genetic information and turning it into actual proteins. So maybe you guys should describe to me.
Well, okay.
Describe to me the original cell.
Well, the original cells obviously were more probably prokaryotic. The first protocells probably were just a bilipid membrane with some kind of ability to channel sodium, the one I looked at.
Right.
But in modern biology, the central dogma of biology, again, biologists out there, please let me know if I'm foobar in this. But the central dogma of biology is basically translation mRNA to I have so scatterbrained today. It is not translation. Translation is the last thing. Transcription. God damn it. Transcription mRNA to translation. Right. So what it is the DNA says, as you said, has information in it that will be translated or transcribed into mRNA, messenger RNA, that goes outside the nucleus, and that goes to a ribosome on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and then that gets actually put it into a protein, right? A chain that comes out of the ribosome. That's translation. Well, it sounds based on the codon.
Sounds like you're describing a eukaryotic cell because there's no nucleus in a protein.
Right. That's how it is today. Right. That's how it is in eukaryotic cells. In modern cells, that is how protein synthesis occurs. Correct.
Correct. But even in a prokaryotic cell, it's taken to a ribosome.
Yes, but back then, in the prokaryotes, it didn't have all that. So had to be other ways for it to have some kind of proteins. Like you said, the smallest one I think is 21 amino acids.
Well, I'm a little bit curious because you said at the beginning that you wanted observable science and not theoretical. But everything we're discussing right now is all still up in the air, is it not? All of this is theoretical because there are multiple ways that it could work and could look right. So we're still discussing what would be considered theoretical, correct? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, in a way. We know that at one point there was non-life. There was no life. And we know that we have prokaryotic cells. We don't know what the original cells would have looked like according to the theory. But I think we can look, my biggest beef is with DNA, that DNA is functional information, and functional information only comes from a mind. If we see a recipe, which is functional information, a blueprint or computer code, that's information that is meant to be turned into something else. It's not supposed to stay the way it is. And that's the way DNA is. DNA is meant to create an organism. And so my main argument is that functional information only comes from a mind. And then, of course, I take it in, which I've. Go ahead.
Sorry. Wasn't the world made perfect by God? So why would it need to change?
I believe. Why would what need to change?
Anything. So if God created the world perfectly, which maybe I'm assuming too much, but when God made the world, he made it the way it was supposed to be, right? So
he made the best of all possible world.
Right. So if he made the world the way it was supposed to be, why would he have built in something to allow this adaptation and these changes if it was supposed to be perfect from the get-go?
I mean, that's a good question. Of course, according to the Judeo-Christian view, sin brought sickness and pain, and it broke our universe, death. I believe the universe started expanding. And so
I understand that far.
Then that's where microevolution is very important for organisms to adapt. But I'd really like to.
Does that mean essentially that God built in a fail-safe, knowing that it would fail from the get-go? If I'm just trying to make sure I understand what you're...
Well, I really don't want to fight. I don't want this to be Christianity versus atheism. I want this to be
I'm just,
atheism versus theism or deism.
I get that.
Where I'm just trying to say, I don't care what the God is. I'm just trying to say there's a mind behind abiogenesis. That the evidence points to that is my argument.
The Abrahamic religions, God made things perfectly. So if we want to go with God didn't make things perfectly, I'm totally okay with going that route as well. That's fine. I just wanted to clarify.
I'm just arguing for.
I'm just arguing for
Emerson about that. Who cares? Well, I was just going to ask, who cares if intelligent design is true, but Christianity isn't true? I mean, like, it's kind of funny because I was, you keep calling me Mr. Intelligent Design or something. I definitely do not self-identify that way.
Wait. No, that's not you. There is a person whose name is Mr. Intelligent Design. His name's Edgar. He wrote books. He writes books on this, but these are Kindle books. And he debates physics and science, and yet he claims to be an engineer. And we actually have one of our mods read one of his books. Red Eye read of his books. This guy has not been the same since. The guy, he's a friend of ours. We love him, but something snapped in him.
He changed,
and he's not the same mod. He changed. He's not the same mod as he used to be. His voice trembled. He shakes a lot. It's not a pretty sight. So yeah, we make a lot of fun of Mr. Intelligent Design because the guy is so way out there, and he's caused actual harm to people's minds. I think so. That's not you. You're not Mr.
I want to read this. So. I want to read this book.
Oh, you'll love him.
Induces madness.
You have no idea what you're in for. Do not ask what you're not prepared for. Just see.
That was a great question, Emerson.
Who cares if intelligent design is true but not Christianity?
Do we know a guy?
Right, yeah.
We know a guy. Guy. This is bull. We know a guy who just literally is playing with this guy. His name is Red Eye. He's probably in the chat right now. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're talking. That's what I was just talking about. Yeah.
Fucking Red Eye. He just mercilessly attacks him.
Yeah, Red Eye has not been the same since he read one of his books. It is so bizarre.
He read one
you have no idea.
And I give him a lot of leeway, but he doesn't play with bullshit. Okay, that's one thing I can say about Red Eye. He does not play with bullshit. He delights in playing
I love Red Eye.
He will take your bullshit and just trash you.
And so we're on a bit of a time limit.
Mr. ID. No, I'm just saying.
Bull!
We're
on a time limit.
Dave's so happy to produce again.
Why? Why the fuck are you on a time limit? This is great.
Because he's on his phone.
Oh, I'm sorry, dude.
In a parking lot. Yeah. So a great question, and it's because. Would you agree that people pay a price for ignorance? That having a wrong idea of reality can be very very detrimental.
Have consequences.
Yeah, exactly. So if we were created, don't you want to know? And then the next question is, has that creator tried to contact us? And then because right now you've got a huge number of scientists not even asking that question. They're just saying, oh, we're stuck in materialism. We're asking materialistic questions about abiogenesis. We're not even going to think about a mind outside of our three spatial dimensions. And so, I think it would be just more intellectually honest and curious to ask, has this creator tried to, or this mind or minds tried to contact us?
Well, how did it get to that point? Because it's not like people just dogmatically say, we're not going to consider God, because God used to be the center of all of our understanding of the world, and then that slowly faded away over the last 300 or 400 years, along with the rise of modern science. And I mean, do you think that's
probably
a coincidence, or do you
that labor?
Exactly, because when you take on,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
When you take on naturalistic assumptions about the world, which it's just we used to attribute so much to God, and then we slowly found out that God's not responsible for all these things that we thought he was responsible for. And sometimes people, intelligent design proponents will call this like evolution of the gaps or something like that, or naturalism of the gaps, where we don't have a complete explanation of how this happened or that happened, but we're still happy to say that it was probably naturalistic processes or evolution. And it's not the same thing as God of the gaps. We're identifying a pattern where it's like, if I say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and you say 12, you know, you're not stepping out in faith, you're just identifying a pattern. So I mean, how many times does it have to be wrong before you just kind of drop this as an explanation and just say, oh, maybe just a bigger of me with like magic powers isn't actually a good explanation. And in fact, science has explanations for why we would think that.
Is it also possible that potentially it's not that God's necessarily been taken off the table, he's just not the first one we look for?
It's not the those aren't the explanations that work.
Yeah,
well, and I think the majority of
science. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry,
I'll chime in. Okay, real quick.
Well, I was going to say,
I think what Emerson's. Well, we got such a delay here, Duel. This is what I hate about VCall.
Let the guest go first, Steve. You're here all the time.
No, you don't see that. You don't see the delay. People on the outside don't see this delay. It's like he's perfectly quiet. I start talking, then he hears it, and because this one VCall, but we did this when we were on that other program I used to be on. Go ahead.
Yeah. So to answer Emerson, well, number one, you know, you have so many anti-science theists, which I don't blame the other side, the pro-science side, for being skeptical of religion. And, you know, you've got, you know, I mean, the Roman Catholic Church, you know, killed people, right, for saying that the earth wasn't the center of the universe. Or I don't know if they killed them for it. But anyway, you've got so much hypocrisy and closed-mindedness in religion. And then, yeah, I mean, I understand, but I don't think science is saying God didn't do it. Science is saying this is how God did it. So to me, the more I learn about science, and many Christian scientists in the past had the same mindset that, man, they're finding out how God did it. If I took apart a Corvette, I would not say, oh, I see how this works, therefore no one made this Corvette. I would be like, wow, this is pretty amazing. And then I think people just get in this mindset that they can explain everything naturalistically. But I think when we get to origins, you can't. So the origin of the universe and the origin of life, I think they hit a wall and they're not willing to admit it. And, you know, I think it's obvious when, again, DNA is functional information. If you saw a recipe, a blueprint, computer code, you wouldn't assume that came about by chance over time.
Well, what realistically you're talking about is the watchmaker analogy.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is. Let me address a few things, and I have a super chat too. Okay. First, Emerson's argument is actually a pretty decent argument. I've used it very similar. It's a low prior argument, but it's basically along the lines of every time they've looked for an explanation for something, they haven't determined it to be supernatural. Lightning, for example, with Thor, and we expect to have a natural explanation for a natural phenomenon. That's how science works, right? So this positing of a God has never panned out before, so there's low priors. So even in science, there's no reason to posit one or an intelligence, because we've never seen a disembodied intelligent mind do anything. So we have no prior experience with that either, even for an abductive argument. So that's, I think, what Emerson's saying. Second, this whole thing with functional information, just because there's information there doesn't require a mind. That's one of the biggest things I've always had against intelligent design is they have no reason to make that connection. That connection doesn't exist. And there's something called Shannon information, which I'm sure you've heard of, right? Where you have information through a what's called a noisy channel, and based upon how much loss there is how much maximum information you can get based upon the entropic losses in that channel. That's still information.
Well, I mean, yeah, a good analogy for that would just be does it still exist if a mind isn't there to conceive of it? So unless you're going to go full solipsism, never go full solipsism.
I don't think. Yeah, information is basically okay. For example, in holographic principle, information is stored on the event horizon or the observable universe in the two-dimensional membrane. That's information encoding in what's called Planck squares. That is binary information. Okay, but that's not requiring a deity to do, though. That's basically physics that comes out of black hole theory. Now you're positing that it requires an intelligence.
Is it being used to create something? Because you've got DNA as a literal recipe. It's a recipe for the organism.
I got something that might throw a bit of a wrench into this. So, Answers in Genesis recently covered this, and it's a flower. It's a plant. It's not just a flower. It's a vegetable that if you pluck it off and put it in the right way, looks like a hummingbird. Apologia recently covered this. This is in Australia.
What's going on?
There aren't any hummingbirds in Australia. was the plant purposefully trying to look like a hummingbird that it could have never seen? Or was it a plant? Like, if a plant chooses to have stripes or chooses to have spots, there's no intelligence there.
Right. The organism, well, my main point, so you agree that the organism is determined by the DNA, right? We all agree on that. The genes in the DNA determines what the organism is. Do we all agree on that?
Well,
Phenotype is determined by genotype. Yes.
Okay. Now, do you agree that the first living cell had DNA that was functional, that told it the kind of cell it was?
I think the first cells had
No.
RNA based.
Yeah, I'm not
It's what?
convinced that they had DNA.
Yeah.
Well, RNA still
Yeah,
had
you
the
had to have
same
RNA
information.
for DNA.
Right, but it still had the
Yeah, but it's not-
information, right?
RNA,
No,
DNA,
I don't
two
think it
different
did.
things.
Because the information you're talking about covers a wide
Gotcha.
range of. It would have to have the DNA to become a fish. It would have to have the DNA to become a plant. It would have to be, and it would all just be suppressed until it needed to become those things, which I don't think makes sense.
Well, no,
Yeah,
not
let
full
Emerson
DNA
jump on
for
that.
multiple. I'm
Let
talking
Emerson
about simple
jump on this
DNA
real
for
quick.
itself.
Yeah, because
Well,
I disagree.
first of all,
'cause-
you're very you're good for doing this 3-on-1 thing. I didn't want it to turn out that way, but you're very
Sorry.
you're a good guy.
Especially with
But
the time delay. I apologize for this delay. VMix has always had this issue. Let me real quick, because I got the mic real quick, read the super chat out. Then Emerson, I'm gonna give you the floor so we don't walk on each other. Because again, only with this V call. It's one thing I've always had about V calls.
I'm gonna mute.
Yeah, shh, it's quiet time. No, I'm kidding. Sohan D'Souza for $10 said, nearly all species that existed are extinct. Entire orders have disappeared. Why would a god create extinct species and not just the extant species he's presumably knew he wanted to end up with? Which is a good question for theistic evolutionism. Why is there so many extant species? I mean, so many extinct species, like 99% of them are extinct. We have the fossil record, which, by the way, we do know goes back billions of years. I mean, there's not even up for discussion on that in the scientific community. Now, you creation, no, the Earth's around 6,000 years, but they can't. They literally can't explain any of that, and they still have so many massive problems with, like, the heat problem that I've addressed with Dr. Humphreys, and other huge issues with that. But Emerson, why don't you jump on this for a while about the whole, the first DNA in the cell, and a little bit about the RNA world hypothesis, because RNA and DNA, while they're similar, there are some huge differences between the two.
yeah, and the core. I know that we're like running down his like phone battery right now, so I just want to get to the core of it, which is the information, which is the central argument from Stephen Meyer, who you said was one of your favorites. And so we should probably get to that, because it's not so much the DNA as it is the information in the DNA. And it's kind of worrying to me, the way that you talk about DNA and the way that Meyer talks about DNA. Oh, and what's up, Sohan D'Souza? I know that guy.
He's a friend of yours.
Who just did the super chat. Yeah. But okay, so the way you talk about information is kind of worrying to me, because information, I'm quoting from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy right now. It says, the lack of preciseness and the universal usefulness of the term information go hand in hand. So it's kind of a wide open word. It's used in so many different contexts. So we have to be specific about what we mean. And if you're trying to be general, I would say information is just a way of talking about physical processes out in the world, or just any non-random physical process or any non-random arrangement of bits of matter. And it sounds like you're imagining, and Stephen Meyer is imagining, something on top of that, like some metaphysical ingredient called information on top of the matter or the processes that we're talking about. Like you're adding like pixie dust on top of the chemicals that are there. And it's a mistake to treat, I'm quoting from one of Meyer's critics, it's a mistake to treat this abstraction as an extra entity with mysterious relations to the physical domain. So it's kind of worrying when we're talking about information, which is a fairly innocuous concept. It's just a way of talking about the physical world that's very often helpful. And it's sort of granted this weird metaphysical power that, needs to have some kind of supernatural explanation, when I think we're really making, kind of much of a muchness here. But I can keep going though, because I can quote from Stephen Meyer if you want, just so it's not just because actually,
I've got about 40 minutes, I think, on my battery, and I can plug it in. It's just I'd have to be out of the light. So you're good.
Okay.
Just say what you need to.
Okay, so let me just define Stephen Meyer's different categories of information, and then I just want to pose a question to you, if that's okay.
Okay.
So Stephen Meyer he identifies 3 different kinds of information. One of them is one that Steve mentioned, Shannon information, which he just calls mere complexity. So it's pretty much what everyone else means when they're saying information, just any non-random pattern of bits of matter or any non-random physical process. And he says, and I'm quoting, "I carefully define the type of information that reliably indicates the activity of an intelligent agent, functional information." So he's defining functional information as the type of information that is intelligently designed, which is a little bit problematic. But he also talks about semantic information, which is a specific kind of functional information, and it's conveyed to and perceived by conscious agents. So like words on a page, or the words that I'm speaking right now that are being interpreted by people. So the important part there is functional information, which is information that reliably indicates the activity of an intelligent agent. So what makes DNA functional information, in your opinion?
Gotcha. Yeah, that is a problematic definition, because I was thinking functional information as in its purpose is to be taken and used to produce something. So when we've got DNA and then it's translating, or it's taken to the ribosome by mRNA, and then that ribosome, according to the sequence, and maybe this is the word I need to be using, is that DNA is in a very specific sequence to bring about specific proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. There's 20 different amino acids that are used in life, and it produces millions of different types of proteins. So this is not something that it could come about by chance and time, is what I'm saying, because you've got a very specific sequence necessary to produce very specific proteins that have a very specific purpose. So let me let me abandon functional information and just say that DNA is information in a very specific sequence.
Okay, so functional information is, because I think that Meyer says elsewhere that, because I think, understandably, people asked him to elaborate on what he means by functional information, and it is kind of in the name. He just means information that eventually performs some kind of function, which I think there are other problems with. But you were using it right, though. I think you're using it the way that he intends it. But it's still problematic, because as his critics have pointed out, it's basically a metaphor that he's kind of taking a little too literally, I guess, and sort of elevating it to this status that requires some kind of God to produce, when really it's just a way of talking about things that exist out in the physical world. It's not like there's this atom and then there's information on top of the atom. It's just physical matter.
Yeah, this leads me to maybe a more condensed question, which is just, do you have to have intelligence to have a pattern?
I think with DNA, yes. When you've got 20 different options of amino acids. Well, because that's what we're talking about. So when you've got, because the odds are so much against it getting it right on accident. So when you've got 20 different options of amino acids, and the ribosome or the strand has to be only so long, they've got to cut it off at the right time to create the right protein. Because I think the average protein is made up of 300 amino acids. So you're talking about 300 options on average times 20. So tell me,
but you're talking about a different problem now. Yeah, I can actually answer this. The answer is 100%.
Okay.
The answer is 100%. Yeah, the answer is 100%. And the reason it's 100% is because that's what we have, and we have no other frame of reference. So if you're talking about like, what are the odds? Well, no, it's not. It's because I don't have another frame. Do you have another frame of reference?
Yeah, we see functional information in a specific sequence in our world, and it always comes from a mind. Anytime it's computer code, a recipe, or a blueprint or something like that.
No, it doesn't, because we already agreed about the flower.
I didn't agree on the flower. I just turned out.
Well, hang on. Are you saying all information has to come from a mind?
Not all, but functional. That is taken. I mean, you understand what a recipe is. It is details of how to make a dessert or a food. You understand what computer code is. It's in a specific sequence to bring about an application. You understand what a blueprint is. It's arranged in a certain way to produce a building.
Our contention is
And so
that
same
you
with-
seem to be. Our
Go ahead,
contention
sorry.
seems to be that you're perfectly fine with things being a pattern, but patterns are created by the mind, but not all of them. Therefore, DNA was. But
Well,
how do you
functional
get
pattern.
from? Oh, okay, but a flower with spots is a functional pattern.
Well, what is reading that flower and producing something else from that flower's pattern?
The
That flower's
bees.
not being taken.
No,
The
but
bees are
the
taking that
bees
pattern?
who are yeah, they're looking at the pattern and choosing these particular flowers. So
Yeah, but they're
those
not
flowers
producing
pollinate
something.
and propagate.
But they're not building something out of it. They're not building.
Well, sure they are.
I
They're
guess
building
this is
hives
where
out of it.
Yeah, but not because of that flower's pattern. If the flower had the pattern a
Yes,
little
it
off,
is.
the bees would still. But I'm just saying,
No,
very little off.
That's how over a long period of time you end up with a lot of these flowers that all have this pattern, but no other patterns. And it's because the ones with spots did well and the ones with stripes did not.
Okay,
Right?
but if the spot was
So
just a little off, the bee would still go to it, right?
No, that's the point.
But I'm saying the spots
So,
are still
if
there.
it's
They're
got a
just
spot, right? But
but
the
it's a
spot
hair
for one,
over.
the spots. Yeah, sure. You can have different patterns of spots, but you've still got a spotted flower versus a striped flower, and they're both two different patterns. Neither
Yeah,
of which
DNA is
were
way different.
intelligent.
DNA is way more
And
complex. You
neither
miss one amino acid and it's messed up.
And
But that's
neither
over-
of which,
Oh, sorry.
yeah,
Not necessarily.
Yeah, I don't agree
and
with that
neither
either.
of which,
Well, it has to
Neither of
redo it,
which are
right? So
No, you can have amino acid substitutions and the protein still be functional, or so.
No, I mean, if amino acids change, that's a mutation, and there's a pretty good chance that it would be an adaptive change. And then a lot of those over time equal,
and the thing
But
is
you were
that
saying
no
earlier
matter
that
how
you
many
didn't have
times
a-
or how much.
Sorry, the delay. But you were saying, earlier that you didn't have a problem with natural selection, but I think that that's kind of what we're getting at, where you're saying that so information only functional information only comes from a mind, right?
Mhm.
Okay, but the thing is, like, we can definitely, that's kind of begging the question to say that it can only come from a mind. Like, that's what we're trying to figure out in the first place, is whether or not this information that eventually serves some kind of function. Because she was giving you an example of functional information that performs a function that you don't really need a mind to explain that. I mean, like, you can, all you need is natural selection. Natural selection can produce.
I think it's just, I get what you're saying with the flower, but I think it's very different than.
It seems to me that it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I see what you're saying about the flower, and I agree with you that information has function, but I think it's very different than a code, a recipe. I'll just stick with code and recipe and forget blueprint. But wouldn't you agree it's way different, that DNA is like crazy long, crazy specific, that it's not the same as a spot on the flower.
So the flower is still utilizing DNA to get these patterns.
Right, but I'm saying spots on a flower is way more simple. Like, my daughter could probably draw a flower with spots, but she cannot draw out.
That's phenotype from genotype.
Why is that more or less complicated?
I don't see.
Is it because it's a spot?
Yeah, a spot is way easier than writing out the genetic code. The genetic code is, maybe help me out, Emerson. How long is it?
The whole flower still has that entirety of the genetic code with the change to allow for spots.
Well, I thought you were just talking about the spots are the functional information, not the genetic code inside the flower.
They're part of it, yeah.
Right, but so you're saying the spots are functional.
Jeremy, phenotype comes from genotype, right? So the spots are a direct result from the DNA, because that one is predicated on the other, right?
Right, but I'm saying my daughter can draw a flower with spots. She cannot draw out functional genetic code, is what I was saying, because it's way more complex.
You could write the letters for code and have it out there. I mean, it's just A, T, G, and G and C. But real quick, Kawasa 5000 W, he says by functional information, he is saying he's saying an information that functions because it has a functioner, right? So you're basically just running an argument that because you have functional DNA, functional information, that there has to be some kind of mind behind that. And what Jess is trying to explain to you is there's these teleonomic explanations of why you can have things that appear to have an intelligence, but that they're not. They are guided by natural selection. This is one thing I do note that Emerson noted. You say you accept natural selection. This is all natural selection. These are nature selecting for a phenotype that's beneficial with respect to the environment, based upon genetic mutations, and those genetic mutations can produce protein changes, right? And by the way, you can have amino acid substitutions of proteins. The protein still can be functional, although it depends. It also can make the protein non-functional as well. It depends on you have folding issues when it comes to the proteins. If you have, these amino acid substitutions where you have a completely different polar thing or something, it may not fold properly, and therefore it doesn't do its function. But I think Emerson, you're basically saying the same thing I am here, that this information isn't something predicated on any kind of intelligence. He's using different terminology in more of an intelligent design aspect than how scientists would use it, I think.
Well, when I ask what's the difference between information? Well, when I ask what's the difference between this type of information and that type of information, it seems like the difference is just complexity, because you keep appealing to the complexity of DNA. And it's like, well, okay, I mean, like, we're trying to give these micro examples of information, and then, you'll kind of walk along with us, and then you'll just say, well, hang on, DNA is way more complicated than that. And it's like, but the only difference is that there's just more of what we're talking about. Like, and I still want to come back to the idea that information is just a way of talking about, like, information processing. These are all just ways of talking about matter. Like, we're still just talking when we're talking about DNA going through all these, like, information processing systems, like, we're just talking about matter obeying the laws of physics. We're just talking about chemicals undergoing chemical reactions. And my original concern was that you're kind of attributing something extra on top of that. Like, there's some kind of, like, on top of those chemicals doing the chemical reactions and obeying the laws of physics, there's this, like, extra metaphysical thing called information that can only come from a mind. And it's like, that is that's an issue.
Well, yeah, because the argument is that you don't need a mind.
Well, actually, I'm sorry. I don't mean to keep on going on and on here, but so when you mentioned Thor earlier, and you mentioned,
that was Steve.
You mentioned you mentioned I would say that's how God does it. Like, we give these naturalistic accounts of, earthquakes or, seizures or crop failures or the sun coming up or whatever it is. And you would say, well, that's how God does it. And, someone brought up Thor, and, we used to attribute, or some people apparently used to attribute lightning to a god named Thor. And the thing is, like, why couldn't they just say, well, that's how Thor chooses to do it? We learned about, all these laws that govern electricity. Well, that's how Thor chooses to do it. And the thing is, it all works without that assumption. Lightning works without the assumption that Thor is doing it. And DNA works and does exactly what it's going to do without the assumption of God arranging the chemicals beforehand. Just like you can say, well, that's how God is choosing to, shake the earth is, through the movement of tectonic plates. But the thing is, it works without that assumption. So we just kind of Occam's razor it and then move on from there.
And can I jump on that real quick? That you could do a reductionism approach, right? And you could say, okay, DNA functions because of a mind. Okay, chemical processes function because of a mind. The laws of physics function because of a mind. DNA, as you would agree, is a chemical, right? It's a biomolecular. It's a chemical reactions that happen. There's catalytic functions that lower the activation energy. So you have things that normally would not take place at a certain rate. Will speed up the rate of a reaction. These things take place because of laws of physics. So what I've actually had people message me. They want to have a discussion of what's more base, physics or chemistry. But when it comes down to it, if you want to take the reduction approach, why are you sticking with DNA when the argument can be reduced to why does the laws of physics, why does the laws of chemistry work the way they do? It has nothing to do with the complexity of DNA, because that's just it's just small things build up. There's a lot of things that are complicated if you think about it, right? Physics is complicated, chemistry is complicated. You don't need to go the DNA route, because I don't see anything specific in that, because it is chemically based. We can, as Emerson pointed out, we can show chemically why these things, or what they do. We can make predictive models from it. We don't need to posit any mind explanation for that, and it still works. So why use the DNA when you just say, well, hey, somebody can design these laws of physics or chemistry?
Well, I think I need to stick to abiogenesis, because the problem with the flowers, we did get into natural selection. So what I'm saying is non-life had no reason for natural selection. Non-life didn't know it was trying to become life. Do you agree with that? Non-life did not know it was trying to become life.
Natural selection has to do nothing to do with their knowledge or not. It is evolution's a non-guided process when it comes to that, right?
Well, I'm saying once an
random, but it's not guided.
Well, once you have abiogenesis, you have living cells, then you have natural selection takes over, because these living cells want to stay alive. You agree with that, right?
They don't want to do anything.
Right.
They don't have any say in it.
Well, eventually they do.
Them, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, realistically, do my skin cells, do my current skin cells want to stay alive? Do they have a desire?
I'm sorry. The ones that are the survival of the fittest, the ones that are best suited for their environment live. But I'm saying is non-life, it just didn't. RNA is still RNA. If it's in a lipid membrane and that gets broken up, I mean, no big deal, right? What is the motivation? Again, I'm attacking abiogenesis, that I don't think non-life would accidentally become life. And I don't think that DNA would accidentally put itself in the right sequence, is what I'm getting at. From non-life to life.
Nobody claims
why does that apply?
Well,
why does that imply the existence of a God?
I'm sorry?
Why does that imply the existence of a God?
Because again, at one point we had no DNA. We all agree that at one point there was no DNA, and then at one point there was functional DNA in the proper sequence to make proteins, right?
At one point we had no cars. At one point we had no electricity. At one point we had no running water.
They were designed by a mind. You get where I'm going?
Right, but they
at one point there was no functional.
Let me steel man you. Let me steel man you real quick. It's essentially that, especially if we go back to the flower argument, well, the flowers already have the DNA, so God put that DNA there for the flowers to be able to do what they need to do to select properly for their own, so they can prosper.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So we can walk that back, and we can walk that back, and we can walk that back all the way down as far as you would want to go, all the way to abiogenesis, which essentially just means stuff was put in place, guaranteed to do what it needed to do to become life, and that the reason behind it is because of a God. And there's the contention, is that lots of people don't agree that there's a reason. It did because it didn't have any other choice.
Well, I'm just appealing to logic. At one point there was no DNA, and then there was DNA in the right sequence to make the right proteins for life. And I'm saying that's a recipe. Recipes don't write themselves.
That doesn't follow.
Right, but we already went over that this was already 100% because we don't have any other frame of reference. It's 100. Like, life has to come from it because life did come from it.
I think no offense, Jeremy, but you're missing a hell of a lot of steps there. You're just basically saying, hey, no life, DNA, cell. There's a whole bunch of iterations between those things, right? And by the way, we've, because of science, we've looked at evolution. We see how extant species exist. That was what evolution's for, to explain biodiversification. And then when we start moving back the time frame, we get back, for some odd billion years ago. Well, it wasn't life that long, but 3.8 billion years ago, I think that they can go back. There's a point of abiogenesis where, we're still learning stuff, but we've learned before. We didn't understand extant species of how they came about. We didn't even have that much information until Darwin came along and explained through natural selection and through, he didn't know about genetics, but he had his own hypothesis about it, but he knew something had to change. It was more of a granular approach, but because of science, we're understanding what we're observing. And just because we haven't gotten that last bit of the puzzle yet, which they expect to maybe the next couple of decades, I don't know why, and I say this as a science person, why would we posit that that's where God has to be? I agree with Emerson. I don't think it's a needed assumption. It's something that you want to posit, and I get that, and you're okay to do that. I'm not faulting you for that at all. I really am not. But I don't see in science, since we're talking about science, not philosophy here. In science, there's no reason to posit anything like that. There's no reason to posit intelligent design. It's an added assumption that doesn't need to be there. And in science, we don't do that. Does that make sense?
Okay. Well, yes, but let's go back because you're saying that DNA came about by time and chance, right?
Well,
not chance.
No, not chance, because it's again guided by chemical processes. These things.
Well, the sequence.
Well, the sequences are because of iterations that worked. Because you had RNA sequences that work. DNA is similar to RNA, right? But it's double stranded and
so maybe I can make this a little bit more smooth. It's not chance because any other attempt or any other grouping that would have worked didn't.
Yeah, they failed.
So if this one worked,
but that's assuming there was no creator, that it was time and chance.
No, that's without that.
No, it's not.
That's without that entirely. I don't need that. I don't have to assume anything.
Yeah, you're making one critical mistake here. There's a difference between, like, for example, I'm not a metaphysical naturalist. Okay, I'm like most people. I'm a methodological naturalist. I think that's most common nowadays. But there are people that are metaphysical naturalists, and that's fine. But I'm not one. Okay, but there's a difference between saying I'm going to assume there is no deity to say against saying I don't need to assume one. Right? I'm not making the assumption there's no deity. That's not in my ontology. But I am saying I don't need to, in science, posit a deity to explain things of this nature when it comes to abiogenesis. There's a huge difference to be made there.
Okay. Well, and I'm trying to get you to say that you do need to deposit a deity because the odds are against you. Again, let's go back to proteins. There's millions of different proteins, right? Millions of different options.
Well, in the body.
Hey, but we covered this already.
But it got it right. This is my issue, is that it could not. I don't believe, and I know, what is it, incredulity or whatever. I don't believe it's statistically possible for non-life to accidentally get the sequence right for RNA and DNA to create the proteins necessary for life. That's my argument.
Okay, so we're back.
If we disagree.
I want to say one thing, and then I want to let Emerson go. So we already went over this. This is the 100%. The odds are 100% because that's how probability and that's how statistics work. Because we have one situation where this has come about and we have no other frame of reference of any other universe that, like, outside of, or any other abiogenesis event to base that percentage off of. So right now, there's been one time where it happened and one time it was successful. So your odds are actually 100%. Emerson, please take it.
1-to-1, yeah.
Let me answer that because I disagree. And the reason why I disagree is because you're assuming in that it was done naturally. And I'm saying that we don't see that in our universe. In our universe, when there's specific sequence, it always comes from a mind. When we got something
there's
as
no
complex
assumption.
as
science does
you're assuming it was done naturally. Because I'm assuming that it was God that did it. And you're saying it's here, therefore chance did it. I'm saying it's here because God did it. And so I'm saying you're 100% wrong.
We keep telling you it's not chance.
Just let Emerson.
Unguided natural selection. Unguided natural.
Go ahead, Emerson.
Right. Well, there's a huge difference between, so I guess if I could make since you actually do seem, I kind of thought, to be completely honest, I thought you were a little bit full of shit at the beginning when you were like, oh yeah, I love science, I'm open to learning, but I actually believe you now. But
I believe the guy. I do too.
I honestly do.
You're the perfect people we want to talk to. Trust me. So props to you.
Well, thank you.
So if I could make a reading recommendation, it would be at least the first chapter of The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. Like, he does sort of address this about, how the first life arose, because you're kind of skipping straight to DNA. Like Steve said, there's a lot of steps in between. And I think he starts off, maybe it's chapter 2, but he says in the beginning there were replicators. But he talks about this concept called survival of the most stable, which really kind of clarified for me how abiogenesis, it's not just chance. Like there actually are physical laws and, comprehensible processes that it does make sense. It's not just appealing to randomness and chance. And so yeah, like you just have self-replicating molecules. But just to go back to, I'm trying not to get distracted about that, but abiogenesis is the thing that you wanted to come back to. So my biggest problem with your arguments about abiogenesis is the design inference that you make, because you start off saying, hey, isn't DNA complicated? And it's like, yeah. And then you're like, well, isn't it crazy that it's here? And it's like, yeah. And you're like, well, God. It's like, it's just a classic God of the gaps move of we don't know how X happens, therefore God. And so, it's not really a problem for atheism to say that abiogenesis is not understood, or, it's unlikely, because, even if you're right about everything you're saying, it's just not a problem for atheism. It's a problem for, maybe some fields of biology, but I feel like you're kind of zeroing in on natural selection maybe, or just randomness as it, is invoked. But the thing is just like the design inference is this extra step that's being made after all these other claims that you're making. And it's not just a step. It's like a leap, because we're talking about something that we don't understand. And then you're saying, therefore God. And then you're kind of trying to dismantle some of what you understand of the naturalistic answers, which it sounds like you think it's just like randomness and chance. But that's not really what's being posited. But I'm saying, even if you read The Selfish Gene and read, the most recent work on abiogenesis and had a more robust understanding of natural selection, and you still said, yeah, this doesn't make any sense to me, then that still wouldn't be a problem for atheism. Because even if all known natural processes could be, kind of debunked, well, that's just a problem for natural processes that we know of. There are obviously probably other natural processes that we don't know of that are working. And even if you debunk all the naturalistic ideas that are around right now, which is, a big if, then there could be, other naturalistic explanations. And then even then, if you say there are no naturalistic explanations or rather, if you say, I think that intelligent design is true, well, that's still not anywhere near God, because there are other versions of intelligent design. So like Hitchens used to say, like, oh, you haven't even, you're only at deism. You still have all your work ahead of you to get to theism. We're not even at deism yet. Like, we're just at maybe some of the naturalistic explanations of this don't make any sense, which, as we've been trying to explain, remains to be seen. But even if you succeeded in all of what you're saying, that's not an argument for a God. That's 5 steps down the road.
Yeah, alien life could be that.
I'm willing to get people to deism. I'm just trying to get people to admit that there's
we're not even there
behind deism. Well, to me, we are. That recipes only come from minds, and I know you disagree, but this. I'm not going to give up on this. That recipes and code only come from minds. I know we disagree.
Let me ask you this, because you're making what's called an abductive argument, and an abductive argument is a type of inference based on induction of things that we've seen before. Okay. Now, Let me ask you this. We have seen information come from people, from minds. I'll grant that arguendo. But have you ever seen information come from a disembodied mind without a physical substrate? Ever?
Not something like a recipe or a code. No.
Okay.
And if you've got an example,
I've done a debate on code, and I've explained to people my understanding of code. I don't think DNA is a code. I know some biologists differ on that. Most of the biologists I know, except for one, I know Seigart calls it a code, but most biologists I talk to, they don't actually think it's an actual code. It's more of a cipher. Crick actually wanted to call it a genetic cipher, but he didn't think it sounded cool enough, so he called it the genetic code, because it is more of a cipher. But the wording is a semantic issue. But you're arguing something that, because this is a code, in cryptography, yes, a cryptological code has to come from a mind. I'll grant that, because this means that we are taking something that means this, and we're going to call it this. It's called a secondary symbol. So what we have is this: we say like the moon is made of green cheese. We have a code book, and we look at the phrase "the moon is made of green cheese," and that stands for we attack at dawn. So if the enemy sees, oh, us communicating, the talking, oh, the moon is made of green cheese. They have no idea what that means if they don't have the code book, right? That's what a coding cryptography means. That would come from a mind. But what we're talking about here is encoding of information, as far as all it is say the cell is saying, here is the DNA. It's being converted to a messenger. The messenger is going out and it's being translated in a ribosome by the codons into some amino acid. Well, it's a three,
and all of that is reducible to chemical reactions. We're just talking about chemical reactions.
It's all can be explained by chemical reactions. This is how each iteration, each step, and we've never seen a mind do that. We've never seen a mind have without any kind of physical substrate. So even as an abductive argument, it would fail for a deity, because the most you can get to is there is some intelligence with some kind of actual mind with a brain, aliens. I'm not saying aliens, but aliens that created. But then you push it back further. What are they predicated on? Are they not DNA based? I mean, it basically goes on to like an infinite regression. But the most you can get for to me as a valid, somewhat valid abductive argument is that you can only predicate that on what we have as priors, and we've never seen a disembodied mind create any kind of intelligence. We've never seen that before. That's my counter argument to that, by the way.
I think you're looking at
Super chat, Steve.
Oh, we got it. Super chat 10,000 W. Kawasa says, if you're not giving up despite adequate scientific explanations and rebuttals, then what was that about open-mindedness and learning things you laid out from the beginning? Was that a lie? No. And first of all, this guy's, I can tell you right now, you're an honest dude. I don't think you're lying about anything. I think you're straight up.
Listen, if you weren't honest, I'd be trolling the hell out of you right now. And I'm not.
There are dishonest creationists. Don't get me wrong. I've dealt with numerous of them, but those are the ones that I don't really bother with, because I don't think they're actually looking for an explanation. I think they're just running a narrative. You seem sincere, and I'm thrilled to death that there are creationists like you that are sincere, and we can have multiple discussions on it. And I enjoy that. That's what I look for. So I don't want to accuse anybody of lying, because people throw that term around like it's water. People make mistakes, and for lying there has to be an intent. And sometimes there are justifiable called virtue lies, white lies. But most of the time there has to be an intent behind lying. And if somebody is sincere and they actually have a belief like he has, then he's not lying, even if he's wrong. People confuse lying with wrong, and it just in this community especially, it's disturbing, because there's a huge difference when you're throwing out that term lie. No offense,
well,
but
I think correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I think what they're getting at isn't necessarily that you're lying about what you believe, but I think what they're getting at is that you said you were fine to listen and hear out these arguments, but when presented with these arguments, a lot of your response has been, okay, well, we're just going to disagree, or we're getting, yeah, but I'm not going to give up on this.
Well, I mean, we could use the same thing against us, though. I'm open-minded too, but
I'm not saying that that's. Yeah, I'm not saying that's lying. I'm saying that I think what's coming across is they're starting to think you might be dishonest in actually learning the subject.
I disagree, because I'm not convinced with your science.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not saying you aren't. I'm just trying to clarify what they're getting at.
Yeah, I just think the same argument can be used against us, because in virtue epistemology, open-mindedness is considered virtue, right? You want to be able to look at something and change your mind if given enough evidence, right? Because if you're intractable and you will not change your position, then you're not considered to be virtuous, because you're just saying, I'm closed-minded, I cannot be changed. I don't think he's like that. I don't think he's saying, and I don't think anybody here is like that. We give enough evidence, we should be able to change our minds. Now, granted, it would require a hell of a lot of evidence to change my mind on certain things. Like, I am advocate that younger creationism is complete BS, and flat Earth is complete BS. However, if I was taken up by an alien spaceship, again, not saying aliens, but aliens, and they showed me the Earth and it was flat, I would have to therefore go, okay, the Earth is flat. I don't understand this, and I try to figure it out. But we are open to revision of our beliefs, and I think that he's like that. And I want people to understand that, because we've had other people on very similar that were in his position. They no longer believe young Earth creationism, right? So they have changed their position. It can happen, because that's my goal, is to get people out of young creationism.
Oh, I was one of those people.
There you go. See,
I mean, now
Yeah, maybe you can help me
specifically.
out with that. Maybe you can help me. Not help lead me to the truth, but help me pressure other Christians, because Jesus said that in Mark 10:6 that Adam and Eve were at the beginning of creation. So if you debunk young Earth creationism, you're debunking the Bible. You're debunking Jesus, because then he said something that wasn't true.
Every day for
Every day.
it's trivial.
Maybe we should have that talk later.
I'd
Maybe
love to. Super chat real quick. $102. Water is a chemical recipe. No mind made that. Yeah, I don't know if you know my background, but I've been mentioned in the journal Creation, by the way. Believe it or not.
I didn't know.
Yeah. Dr. Humphreys mentioned me, and the editor mentioned me. So I have been mentioned. I am a very big anti.
They mentioned you like on a hit list, or
no. What happened? No, quite the opposite. What happened was I have correspondence with many of the PhDs in the young Earth creationism field. I've corresponded with Austin, Humphreys, a lot of them, and the correspondence I've had with Humphreys, he basically has been telling me for the longest time that the evidence is there. You just have to go find it. But his predicating that on it could be no other way, right? Because in the younger creationist movement, it has to be that way. They actually have to sign a statement of faith, and like a waiver, saying that in order to be with CRI or with CMI or AAIG, that any evidence that goes against the science must be dismissed by fiat, which to me takes away their scientific credentials. They are no longer scientists. So his argument is that, for example, the Earth has to be young because it could be no other way. Therefore, the heat problem, when it relates to how much energy we have to account for over billions of years of radiological decay in a matter of 7,000 years, they can't figure it out. The younger creationists still have not been able to solve that problem. So I was talking about that, and we got onto helium diffusion rates, which I'm sure you may have heard of. I brought two leading experts on that are friends of mine, Dr. Hinkie and Dr. Lachey, and they came on 2 times, 4 hours apiece, to talk about Humphreys' work. Humphreys was nice enough to respond to it. He wrote a letter to the Journal of Creation. I think it was the 43rd edition, 3rd quarter. And he cited me as somebody who facilitated that, and as a young Earth creationist critic, and the editor made a note of it as well. But he cited me in his paper because I was helping try to explain to the layperson about helium diffusion rates, which is not an easy topic. My thing was polonium halos. I actually got a presentation I did debunking polonium halos for Gentry's work, because my background was actually nuclear physics for the most part. And so, yeah, I was mentioning it. So I really am a big anti-young Earth creationist in here. So we'll have that discussion. Trust me, I could debunk young Earth creationists, and I know Emerson can. But Emerson, you were a young Earth creationist, right?
Oh yeah, I was safely sheltered from any knowledge of biology or evolution until I was like 18 or 19. Like I was even like opted out of classes and stuff. I just never even cared about it really. And I was just like, it was the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate that was like the thing that kind of exposed me, because, like I said, I was sheltered from all knowledge of evolution and biology, like like a lot of Christian children that I know, and perhaps that's telling. And it wasn't just that I believed that the only people who believed in evolution were like angry atheists. Well, yeah, I mean, kind of like the God's not dead stereotype of the professor. Like basically just like every single atheist is like a their atheism is caused by cancer
Sorbo,
of the mom.
Oh
no. I was Kevin Sorbo in God's Not Dead with the parody that Zod did. I played Kevin Sorbo. That was fun.
Oh my God. I'll have to watch
that. I did. Even at the end, I'm doing the whole what does he say?
Why do you hate God?
No, is something else he said. Oh my goodness, what is he says at the very end. I've got my own line. Whatever. It was fun.
The one that always gets me is when he's like in that screaming match with the kid, where he's just like why do you hate God? Why do you hate God? And then finally he snaps and he's just like, because he took everything from me. And it's like, oh, there it is. He's just damaged. That's why but that's what I believed about all atheists, though, and people who believed in evolution. And obviously that was synonymous, evolutionists and atheists and communists and Marxists and fascists and secularists.
I did a debate with Wayne Filmer, one of my first debates, and who's still one of my greatest friends to this day now. He was a friend of mine before. We had a little tuffle going on. It was on macroevolution. He was a young earth creationist, and he and I debated on it. He came back like 2 hours later and he went, I checked in what you were saying. It seems to be legit. A month later, he took time off. A month later, he came back. He's like, I left young earth creationism, and I found out that everything I learned was completely wrong. And now he's a science educator. Many years later. Now, this was several years ago, but he didn't lose his faith. He's still a Christian, right? So
yeah, you run into.
Real quick, I want to get this up because it's important. My goal is not to change people's theological positions. I don't care whether you're an atheist, theist, agnostic. That's your deal. I just want people to be true to themselves. But we're talking science here. Young earth creationism is debunked by science, bar none, like flat earth is. But that doesn't mean you have to lose your faith. I don't care if somebody believes in God or not, or is an atheist or theist. That is their personal thing. That's not contingent upon the science. So he left young earth creationism, but he didn't lose his faith. Now, Emerson, you are no longer a believer in God, though, right? So you lost everything. You think you said? Or do you
no, that Kevin Sorbo lost everything, but no, I didn't. My life is a lot better, honestly. But I did lose my faith. I actually I became an atheist before I started believing in evolution. But I actually do care whether or not people are religious believers, because, like we said at the beginning, beliefs have consequences, and I think that there's no right way to be wrong. Like, I think that if you're going to be walking around with, well, I mean, it's just you can just open any newspaper and see what I'm talking about. Like, the parties of God are not having a particularly good influence on the world, and they never really have been.
Yeah, and by the way, there's a huge discussion to be had that, and I'm not going to disagree with Emerson to a point, because there's a valid argument to be had there. It's just not my wheelhouse. It's not my thing. It takes a village, right? I know where I belong and where I don't. Go ahead, Josh.
Just to address chat real fast. If Jesus loves you and Jesus loves you and Jesus loves you, who does Jesus love the most?
God.
Obviously, Jeremy.
Really? It's himself? Does Jesus love himself the most?
Well, not all Christians believe that Jesus
is it John?
God.
There's a discussion right there.
Yeah, John called himself the disciple that Jesus loved.
It's true. He did.
He was like the most beloved, wasn't he?
So is it reasonable that John can self-proclaim that Jesus loves me the most?
Maybe. I don't know.
Super chat,
so
Rez.
Okay.
Real quick. Rez Instance, by the way. Thanks for your games there, Rez. $10. Rez was playing with on Divinity 2 the other day. Fun game, by the way, guys. Somebody had bought me Divinity 2, and I got to tell you, I'm really getting into it. It's hard as can be. I'm not going to lie, but for a couple hours of playing a game, because I've never really sat down and played for that many hours before. This game's actually taking up my time. Actually, I'm like so busy, but I was like, I'm going to play a game. Dang it! And Divinity 2 is a good game. But he says, and God said, quote, let there be an inconsistent, immoral, illogical book of my word and teachings. Let that book be debunked by basic science in time, invalidating my existence. # whoops. And I have no problem people pausing the Bible for evidence. People say, well, the Bible's the claim. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the Bible is posited as evidence for why somebody epistemologically thinks it's okay to believe in God. These are epistemic justifications, not scientific ones. So I don't have a problem with that. But I do think there's a lot of issues with the Bible. I don't read younger Christians in the Bible. I think that came much later. I think that when it came to narratives by Usher and by White and a few other people, that younger creationism was much later on. I don't think that was biblical at all. I think that was extraneous to the Bible, and then people were running with that. And then because of people like Ken Hovind, who has been on this channel many times, I don't know if you know, but I actually was friends with Ken Hovind.
Abiogenesis also isn't really the biggest issue when it comes to the age of the Earth or young Earth creation. So
Right.
abiogenesis isn't relevant.
I can't figure out what your worldview is, to be honest.
Well, I'm just trying to get people to go from. Yeah, I'm not arguing for that today. There's two arguments in my mind. One is there a mind that created us? And then the second part would be, well, what mind is that? And my belief is Jesus. But this conversation that wasn't the purpose of this conversation in my
No, I
mind.
agree
It was
with you.
just
I would love to come back and have a conversation about why the Earth is young at another point in time. We don't have to have it right now, but I would love to have that conversation.
We're going to have you back once a week, man. We're going to make you a superstar. Go check out his channel, man. We'll promote your channel. I'm okay with that. You okay with that if we promote your channel?
Oh, please. Yeah. Atheism versus logic. Yeah.
Atheism versus logic.
I'm
Keep
okay
an eye
with
on
promoting
this. This is going to go
channels
good.
if we can, do rebuttals like we did. Again, people always say, well, why do you platform certain people? There's reasons for things. And this is a perfect example. I'm happy to promote his channel. And people like Steve's promoting a creationist channel. Yes, because this person wants to have a dialogue. He's not like the Matt Powells of the world. I don't know if you know about that guy, but that guy I try to help out. He just shouted at everybody and then started running these narratives like, you know what? We should kill all gay people, but not us. Well, the government do it. I mean, just bizarre narratives. That we as moral individuals go, oh, no. That's not the kind of person we want to have a discussion with. I mean, so you're the perfect person that we want to talk to. Trust me.
Well, thank you.
So props to you.
So my question for you guys, if I can. So I guess, there's no improbability that would change your mind, right? That if we could show that something was so improbable, it's impossible, you wouldn't believe it because, again, you see that life is here and therefore it is probable. Is that correct?
I don't think life
you're
came about by utterly random chance. So, I mean, you're not really getting at what I think about abiogenesis or DNA or life on Earth generally.
Well, because if you do have RNA arise, it still has to find a membrane. It has to be in some kind of lipid membrane, and there's probably some kind of probability of how those two would find each other, and then they can't get squashed. You know what I'm saying? There is probability in abiogenesis. You would agree?
Maybe I can address that real quick. If the odds of something happening is 100%, what room is there for chance?
Well, it's not completely
right. That's what I'm saying. In your mind, it's 100%. But in my mind, DNA accidentally writing itself, or I'm sorry, by natural processes, it getting the proteins right. I think there's probability involved, and I'm just asking: could probability change your mind, or are you just like
probability?
I mean, if I hold up my phone and drop it, what's the probability it's going to fall? Like, there are certain laws that govern why things go the way that they go. And I'm saying, like, I'm not just appealing to, and I'm not just appealing to, like, winning the lottery to make this stuff happen. And I wouldn't believe it if that was the story. And there are other natural processes. Some of them are really unconventional. Like Thomas Nagel proposed something called natural teleology, which I think would, it's still totally naturalistic. He is not an intelligent design proponent, but it's way beyond the conventional understanding of, evolution, which a lot of, standard, like materialists, like you're talking about, do appeal to, vanishingly improbable things, but they appeal to like deep time and things like that. But the thing is, like,
multiple iterations.
Things could have happened that way, but there are other naturalists who appeal to other principles, like natural teleology is somewhat unconventional. It's not that unconventional, but the thing is, what we're trying to communicate in a bunch of different ways is that we don't think it was just like a totally random, like winning the lottery 60 to the 60th times in a row or whatever crazy improbability apologists want to throw at you. It's like, we're not saying that we just won the lottery. Like, we're saying that there are understandable laws that govern the universe that made us get here, from all the way back there to where we are now. We're not just appealing to random chance.
Well, I would probably also make the argument that the thing is that even if it was, like, if you were able to provide an adequate point of reference, which right now we can't. We just don't have that frame of reference to find out what other probability, like what actually are the probabilities, because we just don't have that information. If you were to be able to provide that information, I don't think it wouldn't necessarily change my mind, specifically because the probability, as far as I'm concerned, is completely irrelevant to whether it did or did not happen.
Okay. Well, can't we do that with ribosomes? We know, let's take the simplest ribosome that's made up of, help me out, Steve, how many proteins?
Well, there's basically R proteins, which are structural proteins, and then you have ribosomes in there for prokaryote, which is, I think, is a 60S for prokaryote. I don't know. When I took biology, it was all eukaryotic. I just remember 80, 60,
so
40. don't remember the prokaryote.
I thought it was 53, but I might be wrong.
All right, so if there's 53
proteins. Okay.
If there's 53 proteins in a ribosome, and we know let's say there's just 1 million options for proteins, then you've got a 1 in 50 million chance of getting it right. Am I correct?
Well, let me ask you this.
Right.
Let me give an example because I think this is kind of important. If I said something is 80 unvictillion to 1, which is 8.0 times 10 to the 67 power to 1, you would probably that's really improbable, would you not? I sure would. I mean, that's a high number. 10 to the 67th power. People don't. You know what's funny is people don't know how large these numbers really are. That's more than the atoms in the universe, right? This is a large number.
Crazy.
It's crazy. So that's very improbable. But that's all that is 52 factorial. And what 52 factorial is, if you take a deck of cards and you shuffle them and you spread them face up on the table, that sequence is 10 to the 67th power to 1 that happened. But it happened. So when you're dealing with large numbers, because these types of events occur, they do happen. They happen more often than people expect. But what happens is, I think what Behe and the rest of them do is they do post hoc analysis, and they go, oh, we're going to throw out these large numbers to people to say, oh, the odds of a protein doing this is this high number. But we're not assuming one iteration. We're not assuming, poof, amino acids start binding together, and all of a sudden you have this large, protein. It is a step-by-step process over a very long period of time, as natural selection and evolutionary processes. That's what it lowers the odds to almost a certainty, if not even a certainty, as Jess pointed out. The probability is 1 because we exist. We have evidence of that. So
again, that's assuming we came about by natural processes. But again, that's assuming we came about by natural processes that it worked. Where I'm like, the
thing is that we're not assuming anything, and you're positing an extra thing.
Well, science, by the way, does assume. By the way, I was a little off. It's the number of atoms in the universe. I wasn't sure. It's 10 to the 78th, but it's pretty close. Okay, so it's up there. It's definitely up there. But science assumes naturalism. Don't get me wrong. That's what methodological naturalism is. Right. But I don't think you have to know that it still works. You can take that assumption off the table and say we can still look at the laws of physics. And I'm again telling you, I think if you're going to take a reductionist approach, forget the ribosome thing, because we can show the iterations where those proteins came from. You had run the argument on your video that in order to have these R proteins, that they had to be from DNA. In order to have DNA, you have to have the ribosome. You have to have the ribosome. You have to have the DNA. It's a chicken and egg problem. But that's long been resolved. Purdom runs that argument as well. But the R proteins don't need to come from an RNA, a ribosome. They could have been done from other means because of enzymatic functions with RNA. So we know proteins can be produced by non-ribosomes. And I think I sent you something on that, or somebody has sent something on recently on that. So
I agree with something Brian Stevens said in the chat. We're abusing statistics.
Well, he's a stat guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
We like to abuse statistics.
Well, can I say something real quick? Just because I actually wrote like 2 pages in response to your atheism versus ribosomes.
Please.
I won't go through them all, but I just wanted to get at least the first point that I wanted to get out about it. So atheism versus ribosomes. So I was irritated from the title before I even watched the video, because even if you were right about, maybe it was just clickbait, but if you meant it literally, even if you were right about everything you said, it's just not a problem for atheism. Like it's not even a problem for evolution. It's a problem, if you're right, it's a problem for natural selection, which is the mechanism of evolution. But that's only if what you're saying is correct. But it's like what you're talking about is, basically irreducible complexity, which is a problem for natural selection, the mechanism of evolution. It's not an attack on evolution itself, and evolution is not synonymous with atheism. So it's like ribosomes versus atheism. It's more like, ribosomes versus like natural selection or natural processes, maybe. But
my thinking was that I was arguing that ribosomes could not have come about by natural means. It had to have had a creator. And therefore, if you have a creator, then that's where it's creator versus atheism.
It's kind of a false dichotomy, though, to say that if it's either natural selection or it was intelligent design. Like there could be other natural processes, which it remains to be seen that natural selection couldn't create a ribosome.
Well, wouldn't you agree either ribosomes were created or not created? Is that a false dichotomy?
No, that's a dichotomy.
That's an accurate one,
It is a case, right? Or it's not the case. But this goes to the Matt Slick error. he's talking about the accounting of like the laws of logic, but you can do the same thing with accounting here. God accounts for it. Something other than God accounts for it. Neither account for it, or both account for it. There's actually 4 possibilities. So you have a false dichotomy when you say.
Well, I'm not even saying God. I'm really saying a creator of some sort, some kind of mind. Either a mind created the ribosome, or not a mind. Isn't that an accurate dichotomy?
That's a dichotomy. We do got, unfortunately, start wrapping this up. Our producer has to go, but we can do a part 2 on this. I guarantee him. In fact, probably a good place to leave it. I think I saw a super chat. Biblical History Skeptics, by the way. Thank you, Biblical History Skeptics, for allowing me to use your Zoom. Go check out his channel. For $2, he says Steve McRae is freaking hot. Thank you. Actually, he said nice. Chesh, but whatever. I'm going to substitute my name in that because I don't want to be a sexist pig in my super chat. Yes, Chesh is hot. We use her for her looks. Get her blind, right? We don't care if she actually has stuff to say. Biblical History Skeptics. She's not just a pretty face, damn it. Although she is dolled up today, I will give her props. You know, she's more.
I was told that I was going to be starting dumpster fires tonight. You lied to me.
I know. I make promises I can't keep, as people know. So whatever, sue me.
It's okay. Our guest was far more pleasant than I was expecting.
Wasn't he?
So
nice?
I'm okay with it.
I enjoyed this. Thank you for having me.
And by the way, Edgar now has shown up in the live chat. We're going to introduce Emerson to Edgar one of these days. My heart goes out to you. You will never be the same. Trust me on this. But anyways, let's wrap this up, guys. I wanted to thank you, Jeremy, for coming in. I appreciate the fact that you actually took our review in the spirit that it was posited in. We're not here to go after people personally. Other people do that. We don't. I go after ideas. I think the people want to spend their time going after somebody personally. It just shows what kind of character they have. We go after ideas, and that's what's always been with the Great Debate community. That will always be what it is for this channel. And you are somebody who wants to talk about the ideas, and we will continue that. So I will get a hold of you. We'll bring you on next week or something. We'll have kind of a part 2 continuation, maybe chess versus AVL. And also Emerson, I wanted you to have come back too. I got a few plans for you as well, because you're just a wealth of information when it comes to intelligent design. So
thank you, man. I had a ton of fun. I had a great time. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. Sorry for the delay problem. It's a problem we have with the vMix, especially when people live in different places. We never figured it out. Real quick, couple super chats, then you can plug your stuff and we can get out of here. Chesh has the smarts and looks. We can't lose with her. This is true. I know talent when I see it. I mean, my mama didn't raise no dummy. Rez, $5. Every time I get here, Steve soon says after, we got to start wrapping this up. Coincidence? I think not. You're right, Rez. I see you in the live chat and I go, hey, we're done. So anyways, A&L, why don't you, you know what? I'm gonna save you for last because you were a guest. Emerson, tell people how to find you.
I'm on Facebook, I believe, at facebook.com/counterapologetics podcast, and my podcast, which is just called Counter Apologetics, as like a yellow logo, is just available wherever you download podcasts. So
Counter Apologetics with Emerson Green. Okay. And Chess, you got anything you want to throw out there? Chess?
I don't know. I think this is an interesting conversation. I think this is really fun, and I hope we can do it again. We didn't get quite down the dumpster fire hole that we could have. So, I mean, some will view that as a positive, some will view that as a negative. I could go either way.
We could get drunk next time. That'll probably start fights.
I hope if we do have a dumpster fire that it's not taken personally and we can still be friends.
Oh yeah. Hey, by the way, Jimmy, do you drink?
Do I drink? Yes.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Drunk creationist night. Let's do it.
You
Saturday
guys
night,
smoke cigars.
I used to.
Oh.
I drink scotch.
You should pick it back up. Okay.
No, I quit smoking 4.5 years ago after smoking for 25 years. I don't regret that decision to stop smoking. But we do have rum and coke nights every Saturday or sometimes Sunday, depending on plans, but it's usually around 6 o'clock. But yeah, I would love to have a rum and coke drunk young earth creationist night. It's free for all.
Yeah.
But,
that would be a lot of fun.
No, I don't get drunk either during those.
No, you don't have to get like slosh. You just get like a couple of sips in, and then we just go.
Yeah, go
Sounds
time.
Good.
Awesome.
I mostly just smoke weed.
Yeah, well, yeah, always get wife approval. yeah, we definitely think
I
you
live
need
in
to get away from
Canada, so both.
Crossfaded.
Oh no, I hate green. I crossfaded before. No, never again. But anyway, Jeremy, tell people about your channel. Again, I have the links in the video description as well. I do, so people can go sub to Atheist Verse and Logic, see what he comes up with. I'm totally down to do that. You have 2 videos so far, so I expect more.
I'm gonna be binge watching you.
This is only 2 videos.
So
what is really, binge? He has 4 subs right now.
Yeah, big time, right? I'm also on Facebook. I've got more people following on me on that. So yeah, it's Atheism versus Logic on Facebook also. And yeah, I'm just kind of going through the prokaryotic cell and just looking at these mechanisms and saying, man, is this really logical that this came about without a creator? So I know you guys disagree, but
yes,
but that's what I'm doing.
Awesome. And like I said, good luck in the YouTube world. You're throwing yourself out there in the arena. God bless you, even though I'm not a religious person, but I tell you, anybody who puts themselves out there publicly, you don't know what you're in for on YouTube. It is cutthroat, but you know what? We do it because we enjoy it and we want people to enjoy it and learn. So with that, guys, thank you very much for watching this.
Wish you all the luck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, Emerson, thank you very much. Dave, wait, go ahead. You got something?
Yeah. I've got another YouTube channel. It's called Jeremy Spry. I've been teaching through the Bible. It's going to take me like 20 years, but I've been doing that for about 3 years now. So I know what it's like to get some criticism. Yeah.
Right, well,
I'll go find it. 1 second. I'll link it in the chat.
Yeah, so at least you're not too new. Awesome. David, thank you for producing this. It's been a while since I had Dave produce. He is going to every so often, but he's also producing The Geek Room. He's producing Scientist Mel. He's got a lot on his plate. Go figure. He actually does real producing. I mean, but Dave, thank you very much for doing this tonight for me. I appreciate it. Now go do what you got to do and take us out, please.